And here we go. Ciao a tutti, benvenuti. Il signore dall'altro lato è Sebastian Edwards. Hola, Sebastian. Hi, Sebastian.
Hola, hi, how are you? Good to see you.
No, sì.
Yes.
So Sebastian and I, aspetta, lo dico in italiano, l'introduzione, poi parliamo in inglese. Allora, Sebastian and I siamo vecchi amici, ci siamo conosciuti nel, cos'era, 87, avevamo anche l'ufficio accanto. Sebastian ha un PhD a Chicago, ha sempre lavorato a Los Angeles, è passato a un certo punto perché non mi sopportava dal Dipartimento di Economia alla Scuola di Management, alla Anderson School of Business, UCLA, dove è Ford Foundation Professor. A Sebastian devo parecchie cose, fra cui il metodo perfetto per fare tante office hours e avere pochi studenti. Ma questo ve lo racconto un'altra volta. You remember that?
I remember that, yes.
All right. Sebastian è anche e notoriamente uno degli economisti latinoamericani e cileni in particolare più distinguished, e visto che si discute di Cile, Argentina, la diseguaglianza e Pinochet che crea i riots, mi sono detto, chiamiamo il vecchio Sebastian che non vedevo da 20 anni probabilmente, 15, e vediamo cosa da dire. Il colloquio sarà in inglese perché Sebastian preferisce l'inglese, ha detto se ci mettiamo a parlare in spagnolo lui va col cileno rapidissimo e probabilmente è meno, come vedete capisce anche l'italiano, però non credo che lo podemos hacer in italiano, no?
No, not yet. Not yet. We'll try next time.
We'll try next time. All right. Bueno, Sebastian, what's going on in Chile? What's going on in your home country?
Well, there are many ways of looking at it. The first thing to say is that it is very, very complex, and that for a number of reasons, most of the explanations that we have seen are very reductionist and minimize the causes. But at the bottom line, I think that a useful way to start the conversation is that there is a lot of rage and unhappiness with the government and with the so-called neoliberal system. And that on itself is not surprising. What is surprising is that this has happened in the country where things have actually worked. And this is a country that has progressed in an incredible way in many dimensions during the last decades. And still we have these riots. And we have to understand two things. First, what are the underlying causes? And second, what were the dynamics that allowed a pretty much run-of-the-mill demonstration to be transformed into riots and looting and arson?
Right. So let's start from the episodic, then we go to the structure. What set of events? I mean, I followed a bit. I actually even gave my own fairly ungrounded opinion in other occasions recently. But in your view, what is that caused, as you said, run of the mill, which means a fairly standard, normal demonstration against a decision to become a gigantic riot? And again, is it only in Santiago or is
it's widespread. It started in Santiago, but then it spread out to the rest of the country, and it's been particularly bad in two cities, Valparaiso, the major port, and Concepcion, which is about 500 kilometers south of Santiago. The worst, of course, has been Santiago. So this is a good, so to understand the structure, there are 4 or 5 players here. The very small one is an army, and they use the word army, of anarchists who hate the system. And the number is not clear, but let's say 2,000 anarchist activists who hate the system and who have used the metro, which is a very modern metro, as the symbol of the system that they want to get rid of. The second player is students, mostly high school students from public schools, who have been very active protesting different issues. The third actor, of course, is the government, and the final actor is the middle class. Okay, so the middle class is sort of passive, or was passive until now. The anarchists are there, but they cannot do anything unless the situation and the conditions are appropriate for them to act. And the students are trying to find ways of protesting and using, I think, that very valid concerns and issues in order to demonstrate. So how did this start? It started with a 3% raise in the metro fare. That's it. And it did not apply to students. Students have a special card and they pay a subsidized rate on the metro. And what the students did is that they started to demonstrate.
Students even after the raise?
No, the rate was 3%, and it applied to regular users of the metro, but not to students, to adults. And I forget, probably didn't apply to seniors either. Okay, so 3%. And the students started demonstrating and saying, this is another demonstration, another clear point that the neoliberal system does not care about people. You add to this that Santiago is one of the most segregated cities in the world, and working people have to take very, very long metro rides or bus rides to get to work. And so it starts like a demonstration. We don't want the metro to go up. And then they bring up a number of other issues which also are valid. Medications are very expensive. Pensions are very low, and so on and so forth. And this is demonstration. And then they become very massive. And from one day to the next, and we can get back to this, they explode. And the middle class, which is very passive, joins these demonstrations. The activists now have the cover of the big masses. The anarchists can only act if they can hide among the masses. And as soon as the demonstrations become massive, the anarchists start with the arsonists, and they then set the stations on fire and set on fire a number of buildings. So the dynamics is run-of-the-mill, very small adjustment in public transportation, which, by the way, public transportation has been at the heart of almost every riot in the developing countries. Now, Chile is, I don't know if it's a developing country, it's more like a middle income country, right? With PPP, like almost $30,000 PPP GDP per capita.
Right. So Chile has become. We will go back to that. I noticed you use the word neoliberalism. But then I'm going to ask you, given that I know you know what you're talking about, what the hell it is, because I hear people talking about neoliberalism here and there. I'm also accused to be a turbo. I'm actually a turbo liberalist, apparently. Yeah. Just in case you know what a turbo liberalist is, please let me know, so I actually gain contact with myself. You remember from our old times, I do have some Freudian background, so
I thought that you were the heir of Freud. That Freud was reincarnated in you.
Not quite. But nevertheless, having a piece of my ego, or super ego, or whatever it is, that I don't know exactly what it is, makes me live uncomfortably. So in case you help me out with turbo liberalism. But jokes aside, so that's the dynamics. Where does the resentment come from? And let me ask you, my hypothesis is it's a transition thing. And the resentment is mostly with Piñera, which I do remember even meeting time ago and having a sense of a person that can become extremely, how can I say, divisive, and a person that is it's quite easy to despise and even hate. Because Chile, after all, if I am not incorrect, has been ruled for the best of the last 29 years by socialist or social democratic government.
All right. No,
So
that's
in
right.
what sense is Chile today and a neoliberalist country without welfare state? So let's try to go. I'm trying to go a bit deeper.
Yeah. So, but let me add something that I think is important. First, let me remind you that I said so-called neoliberalism, but this is the word. This is the word that is being used. It's, So here, Freud may play an important role in our conversation, but I think that also Wittgenstein, because language is very important in what is going on. So let me bring in one point before we go a little bit deeper. As the demonstrations become massive and violent, Piñera decides to take into the street the military and to declare a curfew, which I think the first day was at 7 p.m. And this was considered totally out of proportion and reminded a lot of people of the dictatorship. We lived under dictatorship for 17 years, and it was not a nice dictatorship. It was one of the bloodiest dictatorships of the modern times. So this was considered to be, so that's, now, going back, if one looks at the videos of the initial demonstrations where the students are jumping the turnstiles in the metro and are not paying, what you see is that the police are there and they are allowing them to do all of this. And you can see that the nature of the demonstrations, these are 18-year-old kids, 17, 16-year-old kids. It's very festive. They are having a good time. And my interpretation is that here we have a classic example of the broken window theorem of Jim Wilson. So nothing happens. So, and you see the police, and they are obviously breaking the law because they jumped over the turnstiles. And they are allowed to do that, and they are having fun. And then one kid decides to start destroying things and throwing things into the rails. And it's a lot of fun. And then the anarchists can come in. So the broken window, I think, plays a very important role here, because Piñera, as you say, can be disliked. He wants to be loved, Freud, again. And he decided, so Wittgenstein, so he decided, oh, yeah, we cannot be too strict with the kids. Let them have fun. As long.
Let me chip in. People should remember that Chile is south of the equator. So October in Chile is pretty much March, April. So it's spring.
It's spring, yeah. So the days are becoming longer.
It's spring in Chile.
It's spring, and so things are moving in a festive way, and so it starts like a game. It's like everyone. Excuse me. The first videos, these are high school kids going to a carnival or to a concert, yeah. And then it becomes very very violent. Now, why is there resentment? We can look at this from different points of view. Okay, so if you look at Chile's social indicators, so we already know that GDP per capita went up very significantly. In 2000, Chile was the #3 country in terms of GDP per capita in Latin America, and in 2001 it became #1.
And it's been #1 since.
It has been #1 since, about to be taken over by Panama. Okay, so this is also part of the notion that it goes up, but then it starts slowing down. And so GDP per capita, spectacular. It went from being the 7th in the ranking of Latin American countries to be the #1 within one generation. It surpassed Argentina, which for Chileans is not a small feat, because Chileans hate Argentinians with no reasons, but mostly it's because of soccer, because Leo Messi is Argentinian and not Chilean, so they hate him. And Vidal and Alexis, they are okay compared to Messi and the Argentine crowd. So Anyway, so if you look at the United Nations Human Development Indicator, or now the OECD has a new indicator after Amartya Sen and Joe Stiglitz looked at it, where they add other indicators. Chile is not doing poorly. Income distribution is very unequal, but it has improved significantly. And Chile is in the middle in Latin America, exactly at the median in terms of the Gini coefficient. So where does the resentment come from? It comes from, I think, 2 or 3 issues that have to do with social services. The most important one is the pension system, where pensions are very, very, very low on average. And they are very low for a number of reasons.
A failure from a social point of view.
Well, it's complicated. It's much more complicated than that. So let's talk about pensions now, and then I want to come back to the reasons for the resentment and to what happened. The Chilean pension system has basically 2 pillars. It has a individual savings account, which are required. You are required by law to save into your own account. And then there is a social or solidarity-based pension supplement, which is provided by the state. Since your accounts are individual, there is no vesting period in Chile. I don't know how it is in Italy, but in most countries, like in the United States, there is a vesting period. If you, as many of our colleagues from outside of the United States here in the academic world, if you work for 5 years in the US, you get no Social Security, 0. You have to work at least for 10 years to be eligible to getting Social Security when you become a senior. In Chile, if you work for 1 month, you get a pension. So Sebastian Edwards, I worked as a TA in Chile at the university when I was an undergrad for 6 months. I have a pension. $18 is my pension in Chile per month. So the low pensions are mostly for people who contributed very, very little. Those numbers are not in the statistics for countries like Argentina or the United States or Germany or any of the countries that required a vesting period. And people are very unhappy and about very low pensions. And the right has refused until now to do anything that is significant about the pension system. And the pension system then, it's considered to be at the heart of this heartless neoliberal system where you have to save for old age instead of having a solidarity-based system where we all help each other and provide for savings. I know that you have worked on the pension system in Italy, and we can talk about this, but the Chilean system is completely self-financed. It's sustainable.
Yes, but I'm not going to intervene. I have my views on the Chilean system. About, I'll let you go on.
But basically, I think that the grievances at the very heart is the pension system. That is, and because it is very tangible. People were told your replacement rate will be between 70 and 100%. And everyone knows someone who has a replacement rate of 10%. Now, no one tells them that if you had lived in Argentina, your replacement rate would have been 0, or in the United States. And the list of countries that have a vesting period is almost, it's infinite, right? So this is at the very heart of the problem.
I had turned off the microphone to avoid. So what is at the very heart of the problem?
The pension system
doesn't work, the public pension is not enough, the stock market hasn't done well, the 6 or 7, I forgot, pension funds, eat up half of the returns?
No, well, everything. I mean, there is a notion that this is a heartless way of dealing with old people. Now, the pension, the managers do not eat half of the return. They
the true root of the broad, especially middle class dissatisfaction that clearly goes, and from what I've seen, beyond Piñera. I mean, I've been following around, and you know the various. Sorry, somebody turn on the coffee machine. The various.
Coffee is good. Coffee is good.
Coffee is good. The various previous socialist presidents were all held responsible. So you do believe that the big issue is the pension system?
No, well, that is at the heart. That is around which things revolve.
It's become a pivotal, a focus, the sunspot that coordinates various other forms of dissatisfaction.
So let me take from that and give you something else, which I think is very important. The left was able to install a narrative that says we are run by neoliberals, the private sector abuses, everything is bad, there has been no progress, and it is basically based on an untrue story. For instance, they say Chile has the worst, this narrative of the left, the worst educational system, public educational system in Latin America, when Chile, according to the PISA, is by far the #1 in Latin America. Right. And it goes on and on like that. So once the left
was in power until the other day before Piñera got elected.
Yeah. So let me finish this, because I think that this has some. So the left has installed this narrative, which is very negative. Everything is bad. I think that when that happens, then political equilibrium, or the political equilibrium, is very fragile and unstable, because there are no loyalties, and the sense among a large fraction of the population is that everything is bad. And I think that Piñera was elected 2 years ago by a very large majority, almost 10 percentage points, because of the unhappiness of the middle class, who decided we'll give him a benefit of the doubt and see if he can do something for us. The Piñera people, the right, interpreted this, oh, people support the model, not understanding that this was very fickle, and these people, and they started then putting together a very technocratic program that was based on all sorts of rates of return and so on, ignoring the plights and the concerns and the fears of the middle class, and this middle class, and thinking, oh, we have a solid support and a mandate, when what they really had was that the unhappy people give them the benefit of the doubt, and as soon as
right away.
And then they moved out, they joined the demonstrations, and they then and the right is completely perplexed, unable to understand. And so at the basis of this is that the narrative was kidnapped, that's a way of, or was dominated by the left. And Naomi Klein is a hero in Chile, right? If you know who she is. So neoliberal and globalization, and everything is bad. And then any political equilibrium is really unstable. And or maybe you have multiple equilibrium, and you jump from one to the other with very little, a very small push, like a 3% increase in the metro fare makes you move from one to the next.
I understand. And this actually sounds better to me, and it's more sounding to logic, because the experience of a piece, at least, of a middle class being generically dissatisfied with the situation, even in countries where there is growth and where income distribution indices have been improving, that is, inequality has reduced, even if, yeah, in Chile it was very high. Maybe it would be interesting if you explain to the people listening to us what are the old roots of Chilean huge inequality and also Latin American widespread inequality. I mean, inequality in Latin America is at a level so high that people in Europe have a hard time understanding where it comes from. And I've been trying to observe that it's always been there. It's probably one of the worst leftover of the Spanish colonial domination.
Right.
That those are the roots, right?
Yeah. So
big mind things. But going back, let me. So it's mutatis mutandis. It is not so different from the generic dissatisfaction of a portion of the middle class with the system as a whole that has created populist movements in Europe, Italy being one of them. And these populist movements are very unstable. You know, they can gain 35% of the electorate and a year and a half later get 10% left out of 35.
Yeah,
in your case, it has been a left movement.
Yeah. There are similarities, and now a little propaganda. A couple of days ago, my paper on populism came out in the Journal of Economic Perspectives, and I talk about this. It's a brand new paper in the JEP.
We'll put links to the papers and the book. Actually, you have Sebastian. That's why I actually asked Sebastian to talk about. There you go. Wait. But I only see it because while I talk, Zoom shows me, it doesn't show you. All right, there you go. American default. I receive no royalties, no compensation. Maybe a sushi.
So, but let me go back. Chile again. This episode in Chile defies the general rules about populism. When Rudy Dornbush and I wrote our populism paper 30 years ago, we of course had no idea that it was going to be quite influential and that it was going to have a revival 30 years later. But the point that we made, and that a lot of people have sort of picked up on, is that the initial phase, the phase 0 or phase 1 in the populist saga, is some kind of shock or disturbance. And in Italy, I think it has to do with the 2008 crisis plus immigration. And you go through the list. In Chile, there was no shock. As I said, Chile was growing, and then it slowed down a little in the last 5 years. But there's no big devaluation. There's no big crisis. Nothing big that made people turn around. It's this very small sparkle that ignites the whole prairie. And I think that it has to do with this floating middle class, which moves from one side to the other. And the dissatisfaction is deep, as opposed to being triggered by a very traumatic event. So in Argentina, Argentina is a typical case. The devaluation of 2001 or 2002, the end of the convertibility period, was a major crisis, right? I mean, you remember that it was 1 peso, $1.
Yeah, now, I used to go to Argentina a lot at the time.
Yeah, and now it's 50 pesos. It's only been 20 years, less than 20 years. It's 50 pesos to the dollar, 50, 50.
Now they're going to do worse.
Yeah, they're much worse. So that kind of traumatic episode, in Chile, there was nothing like that, right? So it's a notion where the center is fickle, the right allowed the narrative to be captured by the left, and they were completely unable to understand what's going on. Now, one more thing that is very interesting, and that in Chile, every time I mention this, I am booed and I'm told to shut up, is that there is a racial and ethnical issue as well. And the Piñera government...
It's been the case pretty much in all Latin America. I joke the
yeah, except that in Chile...
Except for Argentina, because they solved the problem at the root. They killed them all.
Right. Well, and in Chile, since Chileans always wanted to be Argentinians, what Chileans do is that they deny that there are brown people. Every Chilean, it doesn't matter where you can, they're all white. But the truth of the matter, is that the Piñera government is made up of very, very elite people. All of them went to private schools and are white. And they are governing a group of people that they don't understand and have never been able to interact with.
Don't worry. We all... Yeah. So in fact, that's one thing I want to try to push. Isn't it in the specific of Latin America and Chile a long-standing issue of ethnic or semi-ethnic or mixed race? Use the word race bothers me, but you know.
Yeah, well, there is. Yeah. So let me add to this. So if you go into...
And there is this big distance which goes in some sense even beyond the huge inequality in income. It's really a almost signal situation which there is an aristocracy. And I mean, many of my friends in Chile, apart from including you, I mean, you have the feeling they belong to a very high standing of income and culture and status. And there is a large mass that is left outside. This is true in Mexico, even stronger in Mexico. I found it in Colombia. I mean, these are the countries that I know decently well. And it goes back to the colonial period. It's nothing to do with capitalism, liberalism, technology, globalization, whatnot. These may have protracted these things or reduced, but the root...
Yeah, so the root, if we go back to the root, as you say, they go back to the colonial period. One of the interpretations, one that I favor, I think it has makes a lot of sense, is that the counter-reform played a very important role in the institutions that were created by the Spaniards in their colonies in Latin America. And in order to fight the Reformation, the church got into an alliance with Spain, and Spain had to centralize power. As soon as you decentralize power, it was thought Protestants would be able to come up. And then there is this very dramatic difference between North America, the 13 colonies, and the 13 colonies in Latin America. So the data are amazing. And a very good data point has to do with Mexico. And at the end of the 19th century, for instance, there were 20,000 banks in the US, and there were only 15 in Mexico. And they all, of course, channeled credit to the owners, and there was self-dealing and greater concentration. So you have all these decentralized financial system in the US and Latin America, all centralized. Another piece, and let me give you one more piece of information. In the late 19th century, this is after the colonial period, but still, in the late 19th century, 90% of the land in the US was owned by family-owned farms, which means at least no more than 3 hired hands. So that's the Wizard of Oz. If you saw the Wizard of Oz,
yes.
They have 3 hired hands, right? In Latin America, it was 3% of family-owned farms. 3 against 90. So the income inequality has as a source the colonial period. Our former colleague Ken Sokolov here at UCLA worked very seriously on these issues, and that inequality has persisted. And Chile now has it's in the middle of the income distribution in Latin America, exactly at the median, with 47, a Gini of 47. Brazil and Mexico and even Costa Rica are much worse than Chile. But what is interesting about the Chilean case is that 10 years ago, or 20 years ago, the Gini was 57.
Right.
So there's been a reduction. So it's improving, but it is not enough. So let me add one thing that a point you made, which is very important, and that is that in the new age, not only vertical inequality, which is income matters, but also horizontal inequality. And with social media, that is crucial. And in Chile, this group that are, or Latin America that you mentioned, the aristocracy or the rich that are cultured and that are cosmopolitan, have interacted in a horizontal way, have not interacted in a horizontal way with the middle class. And there is a treatment that comes to back to the language, the attitude, the way the cities are organized, that really emphasizes or brings to the fore the deep horizontal inequality. People like me, I was very fortunate to go to a highly elite, very, very rarefied English school. And mostly now, and in my time it was a little different, these people, these kids, never interact with people that go to public school. They live in different neighborhoods. They go to different discotheques. They go to different bars, and the horizontal inequality is very, very huge, and maybe even larger than the vertical inequality.
Yes. Wait. I lost myself. Yes. No. I tend to. Yeah. It fits with my observation, my much smaller understanding of the situation here. I would probably stop here. I would be tempted to go on, but people like the half hour.
Okay, makes a lot of sense.
You clarified quite a bit of it.
Yeah. So let me add one more thing, and that is, will it stop? Are we at the end?
I was going to go there for a closing remark. Yeah. What is going to happen?
Of course, I don't know. The president, Piñera, came out and he proposed a package of measures, social programs, which were insufficient. He made a cabinet change, which is also considered to be insufficient, mostly because he moved around people of the elite, moved here, and new elite, younger members of the elite were put in place, rather than brown people that came from the provinces and from public schools.
They cannot. I mean, the parties supporting him pretty much don't have any of that in the elite.
Well, it's a 20 million people country, so they do have some, but they have been lazy and they haven't.
Yes, everybody would understand that it's like, it's just a show.
So I think that what needs to happen now is that the government needs to make a big gesture to convince the people that things have changed. And a gesture that is immediate, that it's not that will take 3 or 4 years. And the one issue that is coming up very quickly as a demand is a new constitution. And the current constitution was initially passed by Pinochet, and it was amended many times, and it was amended in a way such that the signature in the constitution is not Pinochet's signature, but socialist President Lagos. But still, people say it's illegitimate. It was put in place by the dictator.
It's a symbol. Well, I understand that, and therefore that would be a symbolic act of discontinuity.
Okay, so that's where we are now. Our good friend Guido Tabellini and Torsten, they wrote a whole book on constitutions, and maybe we should read that book again in order to find out what may happen.
What the suggestion may be? Well, I'm not sure. Well, we'll have Guido here in the Officina Macroeconomica soon. We just talked about it, in fact, the other day. So maybe one day I'll do a UCLA reunion of the macro group. We'll get Guido, you, Gary Hansen, myself, and maybe even Ed Limmer for the good old times. Yeah. What do you think? What do you think?
That would be great.
All right, Sebastian. Listen, thanks a lot. It was great to listen to you. Maybe we'll have some other opportunity.
Okay, great.
Less troublesome than this. Take care. Have a good day.
Thank you. You too. Bye.